Welcome to How to Implement Article 13 of the Rotterdam Convention, using GHS for classification and labelling of chemicals. This webinar will begin with opening remarks from Agricultural Officer Mario Giarto on behalf of the Rotterdam Convention Secretariat. This will then be followed by a series of technical presentations. Firstly, background, importance, scope and application of the GHS, presented by Oliver Wootton from UNITAR. Secondly, hazard classification and communication, presented by Lisa Ekstig from the Swedish Chemicals Agency. Thirdly, linkages between the GHS and the Rotterdam Convention Articles 12 and 13, presented by Javier Bonilla from the Rotterdam Convention Secretariat. And finally, a practical case study on GHS implementation by Elise Lorenz from the Directorate of Occupational Health and Hygiene of the Republic of South Africa. We will then move to a Q&A and discussion session with closing remarks at the end. Let's now hear from Mario Giarto on behalf of the Rotterdam Convention Secretariat.
Today's webinar aims not only to deepen our understanding of the GHS, but also to strengthen its practical application in supporting compliance with the Convention, particularly by clarifying information requirements and enhancing coordination between exporting and importing parties. Effective implementation of these provisions is essential to ensure that importing countries are adequately informed before hazardous chemicals enter their territory, to strengthen national decision-making, and to improve hazard communication throughout supply chains. I encourage all participants today to actively engage, if possible, share your experiences and raise questions. And also let me thank our speakers and all of you for joining us in this session. Thank you, and over to you, Jack.
Thank you, Mario, for those opening remarks. I now have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, who will provide important background on the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals. Please welcome Oliver Wootton from UNITAR. Oliver, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Jack. Thanks to you and colleagues at FAO for helping to coordinate this webinar. Thanks also to fellow panelists and to all the participants today. Thank you very much for joining us. This is an area that I at UNITAR work on very much so, the GHS, but also trying to link it to other processes, conventions, agreements, and highlighting how classification and labeling is at the core of many of these. I will share my presentation, so give me 1 second. Okay, are you seeing that okay, or does that have the notes still? Jack, is that okay?
So that's not in full screen, sorry, Oliver.
Okay. Sorry, let me try once more. There we go, I think.
Yes, that's working.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. So I will present a little bit on the background of the GHS and some of our work before passing on to other presenters who will go a bit deeper into the GHS and their experience. Okay, so as we have a quote here that really reflects some of the importance of the GHS. It considers GHS as the true backbone of chemicals management, and its importance cannot be underlined enough. As a system that ensures chemical hazards are identified and classified consistently, It sets universal standards for protective measures that prevent exposure. Through product labels and safety data sheets, the communication of hazards helps to ensure chemicals can be used safely and safeguards people's health and the environment. And these are some key messages that we really hold dear when we are trying to support countries and stakeholders implement the GHS, and a message we try to share. There is great political backing, of course. Back in 2002, the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg encouraged countries to implement the GHS as soon as possible. This has been repeated in various forms and guises, and the GCO2, the Global Chemicals Outlook 2, back in 2019, under Action 1 on developing effective management system, also calls for full implementation of the GHS. We can see the GHS having direct relevance to the FAO WHO Code of Conduct on Pesticides, the WHO Chemicals Roadmap, ILO Convention 170, of course, is very much linked to the GHS and classification and labeling in its text. The Rotterdam Convention we'll hear more about, but the Stockholm Convention, highly hazardous pesticides, elements of sustainable trade and development, sustainable chemistry, and many more. So again, we're very pleased to be here today to be highlighting the links to the GHS and Rotterdam Convention, and note these kind of links across many processes and agreements. Of note, the FAO in their 2022 update to the guidance on good labelling practice for pesticides notes that the GHS has become the international standard for classification and labelling of chemicals, including pesticides, and the guidance recommends use only of the GHS for pesticide labelling. Further to this, the FAO and WHO strongly recommend progressive adoption of the GHS for classification and labelling of pesticides. Going further into that on highly hazardous pesticides, there are 8 criteria to define highly hazardous pesticides, and criteria 2, 3, and 4 all relate to the GHS. So they rely very much on implementing and using the GHS to help identify which HHPs are in a jurisdiction. Some work we've done on GHS and agriculture. We have some training materials available, and this shows some GHS-based tables, but also links to the color bands that are often used on pesticides. So there is that link between the GHS and how it can be used with FAO color bands for those that are more familiar with that system. We notice in many of our training sessions, in much of our material, there's always interest in how this works with WHO classifications and previous classification of pesticides. So this is a useful resource as well. So I mentioned global political backing, but of course we aren't there yet with full implementation. And we have this map showing that around 120 countries are yet to implement the GHS around the world. There's obviously a focus on many African countries that are still looking to implement and other areas of the world as well. So by hopefully starting, outreach, raising awareness, we can proceed to get many, many more countries implementing the GHS. And of course, there is a global target on this. So back in 2023, the Global Framework on Chemicals agreed target B6, that by 2030, all governments have implemented the GHS in all relevant sectors. This is a key driving force and a motivating target for us. There are indicators under these targets, and the GHS is often mentioned among those targets, particularly among those indicators, particularly for this target, but broader ones on national legislation as well. So that's a bit of the background on the GHS, and then just to say a few words on what UNITAR has done in the past and looks to do in the future. We are a co-lead of the Global Partnership to implement the GHS. We do this with ILO and OECD. And a range of coalition partners, be it from government, regional organizations, the private sector, trade unions, academics, and NGOs. And we're looking to support activities for training and awareness raising developing implementation strategies, and supporting the drafting and review of legislation. Over the last 10, 15 years, we've supported multiple countries in developing national implementation strategies, and in latter years, gone a bit more focused into legislation. So we've helped Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, El Salvador, Ghana, Kenya, Kiribati, Nigeria, Panama, and Tanzania in getting towards legislation. Some have brought them into place, and some are still in perhaps the final stages of drafting and approval. We also have an upcoming project to support Honduras in their legislation. We've also done regional work in the past. That was in ASEAN and SADC. We've also worked in the Gulf region to update their 2002 guidelines for the management of chemicals. That brought in updated information on the GHS and linked it very much to chemical accidents. We've been working in the African region, so 4 countries there: Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire. With UNEP and a project funded by the EU and ICCA to do training, raise awareness, and develop legislation. We also worked recently in the Caribbean, doing an assessment of GHS readiness, developing a training program. And we also developed elements of a model legislation for the GHS. A word about the IOMC toolbox. So UNITAR is one of the IOMC agencies. This is where, well, as much as possible, the guidance, guidelines, documentation that we as organizations develop, put into the toolbox. And this is no different for the GHS. So a lot of materials can be found on the toolbox. So I encourage participants to have a look there and familiarize yourself with the materials. Over the last 10 plus years, we've been doing a GHS e-learning course. This is now English, now available in English, French, and Spanish. And I note among our participants today, one of our tutors. So thanks to all our tutors who helped run this course. And we hope to finally publish the Russian language one in the second half of this year for public participation. So talking of materials, we do have a great deal of resources available. These are on our website and in the toolbox as well. We look to underline lessons learned, really share these around the world, elements of implementation experience and know-how, guidance and advice. And one of the core elements that we often focus on is how people can access existing information. The GHS itself does not require testing at the national level. It does not require huge resources to develop classifications. There is often data and information available that people can access and cross-reference. And we think that's a very useful message to underline. So to outline some of the ones that we do have, we've got key elements of a roadmap for implementation, lessons learned. We've done lots of legislation guidance and legislation elements. We've done a study on GHS and trade, GHS and agriculture, including the Rotterdam Convention. I know ILO have done a study on the GHS in the world of work, which we also share. And we do awareness raising materials. So we have some that can be used by any stakeholder around the world as introductions to the GHS, their presentations, leaflets, and videos. And here just showcasing our webpage, so you can go onto the UNITAR, our GHS page with our training materials. You can find leaflets to download, PowerPoint presentations that can be used for training, and films that we put together that can be used among stakeholders as well. So thank you very much. I do encourage you to look at our website, the UNECE website, as well as being the host of the GHS. And I'm very pleased to stay on and see if I can answer any questions later on. So thank you very much. And back to you, Jack.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for that presentation. We will now move to a presentation focused on hazard classification and communication under the GHS. I am pleased to introduce Lisa Extig from the Swedish Chemicals Agency. Lisa, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Jack, and thank you for inviting me to talk some about hazard identification and communication according to GHS. I will try to share my presentation. Let's see. Can you see it now?
No. Not
It's
currently.
Okay, it's working. Nothing?
No, otherwise I can show it for you, Lisa.
Okay, I think, okay, let's see. Maybe I didn't share properly. I will try again.
Okay.
How about now?
That's not come through on our end, but if you'd like, I can
Okay.
try and share
Yeah,
for you.
I think it's better. Sorry.
Okay. No worries at all. Okay. Has that come through?
Thank you. Yes. Okay, I'm going to tell you about hazard identification and communication according to GHS. And you can take the next slide, please. Yes, the GHS, the Globally Harmonized System for Classification and Labeling, is a harmonized way of the classification of chemicals, including pesticides, and by type of hazard. If it's a health hazard, environmental hazard, or physical hazard. And GHS is also harmonized hazard communication elements, such as labeling and safety data sheets. I will talk some more about that. It aims to make information available on physical hazards and toxicity to protect human health and the environment during handling and also transport and use of chemicals overall. And it provides a basis for harmonization of rules and regulations. That's a big aim of the GHS to that you are able to implement the criteria for classification, for example, in your legislation. Next slide, please. When it comes to the Rotterdam Convention and the ways to use the GHS system is primarily in Articles 12 and 13 that has to do with the export notifications and that you should be able to leave information about chemicals and their labeling, for instance. And there you get, there you have the connection between the GHS and Articles 12 and 13, because through the communication elements in the GHS, you can use them to live up to these rules or these articles. Next slide, please. Yeah. And the purpose of GHS is, I mean, Oliver was mentioning some of this as well, but it is primarily to enhance the protection, of course, for human health and the environment by providing an internationally comprehensible system for hazard communication. And also, as I said, to provide a legal framework for countries without an existing system for classification and labeling, to reduce the need for testing and evaluation of chemicals, because this system refers to existing data to be able to classify. So it should reduce the need for new tests. And also to facilitate international trade, because if you have the same system for the hazard communication and identification all over the world. It's easier to trade between countries. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, the GHS system, it is built up on first the classification of chemicals, and it can be both substances and mixtures that are classified according to the criteria in the GHS for health, environmental, or physical hazards. And the first edition of the GHS criteria and system, called the Purple Book, was adopted already in 2002. So now we are in the 11th edition that was available last year of the Purple Book, GHS Purple Book. And it contains not only of the criteria for classification, but also the harmonized hazard communication elements. That includes requirements for the labeling according to GHS and the safety data sheets, the format, for instance, for safety data sheets for workers. Next slide, please. The GHS covers all chemicals, you can say, and the target audience for this, for the classification and for the labeling and the hazard information includes consumers as well as workers and transport workers and emergency responders. So it's a broad target audience for this information. Some type of products are generally not in scope for the GHS. That is pharmaceuticals and food additives and cosmetics and pesticide residues. And the criteria for classification are developed based on existing data, as I mentioned earlier. And that using GHS does not require retesting. So that's also a big purpose of this system. And the classification is a package, so to speak, of important knowledge. You first figure out the hazard of the substance using data for a substance. And then you can find out what precautions to be taken when handling that substance or mixture. And when you have the classification of a substance, you can also get the classification of a mixture and further information and management recommendations to be provided with the safety data sheet. This information can be used for various purposes downstream. And within Europe, for instance, it's you refer to the GHS or CLP as it's the CLP regulation in Europe that build on GHS criteria. You refer to that in many different kind of legislations in Europe, for example. Next slide, please. So the concept of hazard classification, I'm going to mention this briefly, just how the criteria for classification are arranged. First, you find out the hazard class for this substance or mixture, which is the nature of the hazard, if it's a physical, health, or environmental hazard. And then with the help of test data and the criteria in the GHS Purple Book, you can find out how this substance should be classified and in which category. And the categories defines the severity of the hazard. So category 1 is the most severe hazard, and then the categories decrease in severity. And a substance or mixture can be also not classified at all when you work with the criteria and the data about the substance or mixture. Next slide, please. And this is just to show you an example of, or this is all of the physical hazards, just to show how they, what it looks like. To the left, you can see the hazard classes for physical hazards from the GHS. You have, for instance, flammable liquids, solids, and gases, and explosives, and that kind of hazards. You can find in the part about physical hazards, and you have the criteria in the GHS for classifying according to these. Next slide, please. And these are the health hazards. With, for example, the acute toxicity hazard classes that you can, when you classify according to acute toxicity, you take into consideration the different exposure routes. And yeah, some other hazard classes within health hazards are sensitization to skin, for example, or the so-called CMR substances, the mutagenicity, carcinogenicity, or reproductive toxicity hazard classes. Next slide, please. And these are the environmental hazard classes. They are few compared to the other ones. You have the hazardous to aquatic environment, acute hazards, and long-term hazards with different categories. And then you have also the hazardous to the ozone layer and hazardous by contributing to global warming. So that's the hazard classes for environmental hazards from the GHS. Next slide, please. Quickly about hazard communication. First, you classify your chemical, and then you can, according to GHS criteria, and then you can communicate those hazards through the labeling and the safety data sheets, with also with criteria for that in the GHS, how they should look like. And the purpose is, of course, to provide information on hazards and advice to reduce the risk for the chemical. And the labeling on the package of the chemical is for the consumer the only information they get when handling a chemical. And for professional users, it's the first warning they get. And then they also should be able to get information from a safety data sheet that is more substantial information for professional users that uses this chemical a lot, often. Yeah, next slide, please. And the labeling elements, they look like this. You have the pictograms, the symbols. There are 9 of them. These pictograms are for all physical and environmental and health hazards. Some are the same for different hazard classes, but these are all of them. And then you have a signal word, should have a signal word on the label. There are only 2, danger or warning. And then you have some hazard statements that tell you about the nature of the hazard, and precautionary statements that tells you how to handle this chemical safely. Next, please. The hazard statements, they are standardized phrases that you should have on the label of a chemical. If it's classified for a certain hazard, you should have the corresponding hazard statement. And there are certain codes for these hazard statements. For example, for health hazards, it's always an H and a 3. It starts with 3, and then you can find all these. The code makes it easier to find these different hazard statements in the GHS. Yes, next slide, please. And the precautionary statements are also have numeric codes, and they are general precautionary statements. For instance, this keep out of reach of children. And there are some preventive precautionary statements for example, do not breathe, dust, fume, gas, mist, vapor. And you have response precautionary statements. For example, get emergency medical help immediately. And then there are some storage precautionary statements and disposal precautionary statements as well. And you have all of these in the GHS, and you can choose the suitable ones for the labeling elements. Next slide, please. Yes, that was the last one, actually. So thank you for your attention. And yeah, you can come back with questions afterwards, I suppose. I hope so.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much for that presentation and for that comprehensive overview. We now move to the important linkages between GHS and the Rotterdam Convention, particularly in reference to Articles 12 and 13. Please welcome Javier Bonilla from the Rotterdam Convention Secretariat, FAO. Javier, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Jack, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here and seeing many participants for many regions. I see some of them during COP, so it's really a pleasure to be here. And in this presentation, I will briefly discuss the linkages between the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals and the Rotterdam Convention. So now imagine a cargo ship transporting a pesticide across a border without a prior export notification, while the chemical containers are improperly labeled, perhaps not even in the appropriate language, and lack the required safety information. So how can custom officers identify the hazards? Or how can workers handle this product safely? Or how can authorities verify where the import is consistent with national legislation? So this is where the Rotterdam Convention and the GHS come together. The Rotterdam Convention helps ensure that countries have the information they need to make informed decisions about the trade of industrial chemicals and pesticides. And the GHS helps ensure that this information is communicated clearly through labels and safety datasheets. So together they transfer information into protection for workers, farmers, and the environment. And today I will like to briefly explore how Articles 12 and 13 of the Convention are supported by the implementation of the GHS and why these provisions remain essential for the safe and international trade of chemicals. So the Rotterdam Convention is often associated with the prior informed consent procedure. However, at its core is an information exchange convention. The convention recognizes that countries need access to reliable information in order to make informed decisions regarding the trade of hazardous chemicals. The convention also contributes to the protection of human health and the environment by promoting transparency and exchange of information among its current 168 parties. And among its provisions, Article 12 and 13 play an important role because they ensure that information is available before a chemical is exported and the hazard information is included in the chemical throughout the supply chain. And today I will focus on those two articles and their linkages with the GHS. So why Article 12 and 13 matter? Before looking at the articles themselves, it's useful to understand how they complement each other. Article 12 is about communication between parties of the convention. It ensures that importing countries are informed in advance when a banned or severely restricted chemical is exported to them. Then Article 13 instead is about communication throughout the supply chain and ensures that those handling, transporting, storing, selling, or using chemicals have access to information about the hazards. This is also where the GHS becomes highly relevant, and it provides a globally harmonized approach for communicating chemical hazards. And the overall purpose is to strengthen transparency, promote shared responsibility in international trade, and protect human health and environment. So let's start with Article 12 on sport notification. This article applies to chemicals that have been banned or severely restricted by a party. Under Article 12, the exporting party shall notify the importing party before the first export of a chemical, following the adoption of final regulatory action. The notification is required only once per calendar year for exports of the chemical to the same importing party, and subsequent export of the same chemical during the same year shall not require a new notification. However, a new export notification shall be submitted before the first export in each subsequent year. And if we see here the picture, we can identify what export notification can contain. So we have exporting and importing parties. Then the identity of the chemical, it means the name of the chemical and the CAS number to easily track chemical. Then details of the sport, expected date of sport, contact details of exporter. Then a summary of final regulatory action if a chemical was banned or severely restricted because of human health or environmental reasons. Then hazard, risk information, and precautionary measures. And finally, contact details of the designated national authority of the exporter country. So this information is specified in Annex 5 of the text of the convention. And here below, you can find the link or you can explore our website to get more details. And importing parties shall then acknowledge receipt within 30 days. If no reply is received, a second notification should be sent. And the sport notification obligation ends once a chemical is listed in Annex 3 of the Convention. So once a chemical is listed in Annex 3, parties now have to submit their import responses to the Secretariat, which compiles and publishes those decisions in the PIC circular that you can find also in our website. And we have two publications in the year, one in June and the other one in December. Also, I invite you to visit our website. So this circular is to inform all parties about those import responses and also final regulatory actions taken. So then, how does Article 12 work in practice? So imagine that a country A bans or severely restricts pesticide X due to health and environmental concerns. A company in country A intends to export pesticide X to country B. So before the first export of the year, the authority of country A sent an export notification to the authority of country B. Then customs and relevant authorities in country B are informed before the shipment arrives and review the information provided. And they shall then acknowledge receipt of the export of country A, so the export can proceed with transparency and regulatory oversight. Okay, now let us move to on to Article 13. So while Article 12 focuses on communication between government or authorities of country A and B, Article 13 focuses on communicating communication of hazard requires that chemical listed in Annex 3, as well as chemical that had nationally been banned or severely restricted, shall, when exported, be correctly labeled to communicate the hazards to human health and environment, taking into account relevant international standards. For chemicals intended for occupational use, exporters shall provide an up-to-date safety data sheet using, again, an internationally recognized format. And information of the label and the safety data sheet should be given in one or more of the official languages of the importing party. Additionally, the Article 13 says that the conference of the parties of the Rotterdam Convention shall invite the World Customs Organization to assign specific harmonized system codes to individual chemicals or groups of chemicals listed in Annex 3. And here is where the GHS enters in the picture. The GHS of classification and labeling of chemicals provide an international agreed framework for classifying chemical hazards and communicating them through labels and safety data sheets. It introduced harmonized pictograms, signal words, hazard statements, and precautionary statements. Here in the picture, we can see the pictograms that a colleague previously mentioned. Had contained red border frame, white background, a black symbol. And it's important to say also that the GHS classification criteria is organized in 3 main groups. We can see here the physical hazards, there are 17, the health hazards, there are 10, environmental hazards, 2. And here in the picture, as a physical hazard, we can identify chemicals that are oxidizers, flammables, explosives, category 1, 2A, and B. Also, in the case of health hazards, we can see here a pictogram that means the substance is acute toxicity from category 1 to 3. And in the case of environmental hazards, we can see this pictogram that means that it's aquatic hazard, acute toxicity 1 and chronic 1. Okay, so how the GHS support Article 12 and 13? So the Rotterdam Convention established obligations for information exchange and hazard communication. And the GHS support the implementation by providing standardized labels and safety data sheets, ensuring that exported chemicals are properly identified by essential hazards and safety information. In short, the convention tells us what information should be communicated, while the GHS help us communicate it through labels and safety data sheets. Okay, so now let us take a look at what you will typically find on a GHS label, very briefly. So we are going to find the product identifier. So we'll find the name of the chemical and the CS number to easily track the chemical. Then the pictograms and the signal words. In this case, we have the flame for acetone, which the hazard statement is highly flammable, liquid and vapor. And also we have this pictogram, the interrogation sign, that means that cause serious eye irritation. And then we have the precautionary statements that keep away from heat or surface parts. And very important also the supply identification, contact details of them. One of the biggest advantage of the GHS is that they have standardized pictograms, so those symbols are recognized around the world and help people identify hazards immediately, even when they speak different languages. But not all the chemicals are products are sold in large containers or drums. Some products are packaged in small bottles or tubes. So for this reason, the GHS allows competent authorities to make special provisions for the mark packaging. The salt requirement may vary from country to country depending on national regulation. However, the objective remains the same. Users must still have access to information they need to understand the hazards and use the product safely. For example, in this picture we have here, it shows a small container fitted with a fold-out label that provides additional hazards and safety information. And does the safety data sheet goes together with the label? The answer is yes. The GHS label and safety data sheet are complementary hazard communication tools. The label provides the essential hazards information at first glance. Meanwhile, the safety data sheet provides the detailed technical information in 16 sections, covering the identification of the product, hazard identification, composition, first aid measures, firefighting measures, handling storage. Also, if it's necessary to use personal protection. Also, we have here the properties, physicochemical, toxicological, ecotoxicological, disposal considerations, transport information, and regulatory information. So we can see that both labels and safety datasheet are essential tools for communicating hazards and protecting human health and environment, as required on the Article 13 of the Convention. And now allow me to conclude with 3 key messages. The first one is the Article 12 ensures that countries receive export notifications before hazardous chemicals are exported. Second, Article 13 ensures that hazard information is communicated throughout the international trade of chemicals. And third, the GHS provides the common language that makes effective hazards communication possible. And before finishing, there is one message that I would like you remember today, and is this: a chemical can cross a border from country A to B in a matter of hours, but information must arrive before the chemical arrives, and hazard information must travel with the chemical. This is exactly what Article 12 and 13 seek to achieve, and why the implementation of the Rotterdam Convention and the global harmonized system remains so important for the safe international trade of chemicals. So thank you so much for the attention, and back to you, Jack. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Javier, for highlighting those important operational linkages between the GHS and the Rotterdam Convention. We will now hear a practical perspective on implementation through a national case study. It is my pleasure to introduce Elise Lawrence from the Republic of South Africa. Elise, you have the floor, and please let me know if you need assistance with sharing your presentation.
Thank you so much. On my side, it shows that I'm sharing. If you can just confirm that it is sharing, and then I'll move to the presenter mode.
Yes, it's sharing, yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you very much for the invitation. I very much appreciate, and yeah, always nice to share this kind of information. Yeah, so jumping into my presentation, just a perspective from South Africa as we move into implementation of the GHS. Sorry, I think there was also a request now. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so this is just quickly the contents of my presentation. And yeah, a little bit of background about South Africa. For those of you who don't know, that we are on the very southern tip of Africa. Yeah, consisting of 9 provinces, and have land borders with several other African countries, and most of them are in the SADC region. Next, this is just a little bit more information about South Africa. I'm not going to go into that because of time constraints, but you're more than welcome to look at that at your leisure at a later stage. Then the journey towards GHS, as Oliver indicated, started with the Johannesburg Convention, and even at that stage, South Africa was keen to adopt, but it took us quite some work behind the scenes to actually get to a place where we could actually adopt the GHS. But that fits in very well with other goals that we have for good health and well-being and decent work and economic growth in South Africa. So the Purple Book, as we have seen from the previous presentations, is a selection of building blocks, and yeah, it is reviewed every 2 years. So all of these actually contributes to the difficulties that can be faced when actually implementing, and also to decide whether or not to have the GHS, especially initially implementation, covering only single substances or mixtures of products. And also South Africa has made it applicable to manufacturers, importers, as well as employers in the country. So these are just some of the challenges that I'm quickly going to deal with. So in South Africa, our chemical management legislation and enforcement is actually fragmented amongst various departments. But we have a very good working relation, and we have a very good structure in place where all these departments, as well as NGOs, tertiary institutions, and any interested or affected parties actually can work together and discuss and come together on a quarterly basis to discuss matters relating to chemicals management. But the department that I'm responsible for, Department of Employment and Labour, mainly with the mandate of dealing with the work environment. We are also the lead department when it comes to the implementation of GHS, and also several of the International Labour Organization's conventions. And the GHS nicely fits into assisting us in achieving many of these goals. The other important department is the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, and they are responsible for waste management and environmental protection, and then specifically for the Rotterdam Convention. Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, they deal with our agricultural chemicals, and they have a register for pesticides and herbicides and all agrochemicals. The other departments play smaller roles, but not necessarily lesser roles in that regard. So for the Rotterdam Convention, we have a focal point in the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, and those are the contact details. And as I indicated, the structure where all these departments actually come together to collaborate is the Multi-Stakeholder Committee on Chemicals Management, the MCCM, and yeah, it is quite a robust structure that we all utilize to achieve our various goals and to work together. So when it comes to the chemicals in the annex here for the Rotterdam, I thought it would be important to note that for several of these chemicals, South Africa also has, for the work environment, an occupational exposure limits. So in addition to having them prior informed consent chemicals, they also have restricted levels that employees may be exposed to. So when we decided to implement the GHS, it was important for us to decide on the scope of application, how far and why, or which sectors in the department would we actually then implement the GHS. And as we have decided to implement it for the work environment, there is implementation for consumer goods, as well as, importantly, for imports and exports of hazardous chemical agents. Cosmetics, foods, additives, and pharmaceuticals are excluded from the GHS coverage. So the selection of the building blocks was also quite a challenging one, but South Africa took the approach of trying to align with our major trading partners. And for us at that stage, it was the EU and the UK mainly. So we tried to adapt building blocks for the three hazard classes that actually speaks to the building blocks that have been adopted by our trading partners to make it trade easier for industry. Also, the generic cutoff levels or values that are being adopted or are included in the GHS, and manufacturers and classifiers needs this information when they are actually going about their classification. So a challenge is always the capacity building for government. We have our labor inspectors at my department. We have environmental health officers at Department of Health. We have agriculture officials, border control officers, even police services, because they often, deal with premises where there is exposure to hazardous chemical agents, or where there might have been an incident. So it's important to build the capacity for all of these, and that is by information and information sharing. So formal training is then the responsibility of government to make sure that all these various government officials get trained. Introductory training has been done extensively, and even some advanced training to assist all these various officials to have the knowledge and skills to actually implement the GHS. Therefore, the public sector information and advocacy sessions just to raise awareness around GHS, what it is, what the benefits are, and at a very simple level to be able to understand the pictograms that are associated with it. So training for industry is not, as we see, the responsibility of government, but it is the responsibility of industry to train their own classifiers and other users. So there is always an issue with regards to the funding when it comes to the training. We have been benefiting greatly from collaborations with the Swedish Chemical Agency as well as UNITAR. And I saw a comment earlier about the formal training that UNITAR provides at the high-level classification and labeling training that they provide. And I can just add my voice to that it is really good and comprehensive training. Another decision that we needed to take is the transition period from the existing old current system into the new GHS requirements for labeling the GHS to following this 16 headings and the information therein. So we saw that the EU used a period of up to 5 years with different phases of implementation, and we learned from them that 5 years might actually be a little bit too long to actually transition from an old system to the GHS. So we selected to go for 18 months transition period. The feedback that we got that was a little bit challenging for some industries to actually meet that 18-month deadline. But to accommodate for that, we had individual exemptions or extensions for specific companies that applied for that to the department. But the finding is that, industry will always want more time to implement. I think it's human nature for us all to just, wait till the last minute or the last couple of months to actually implement something. So even if you do give 5 or 4 years, the tendency is to delay it still some. Enforcement challenges, and this is where we are now. We are at a stage where we are fully implemented. All extensions of time periods have now expired. So we are fully expected of industry to implement, but there is still a lack of knowledge and skills when it comes to the implementation of GHS. From the inspectorate side, sometimes there's uncertainty on how to quickly and easily check if a company is actually compliant. What are the easy things to check to see if GHS is implemented and correctly implemented? So when it comes to the correctly implemented, can we trust the information that are being provided on the safety data sheets and the label? So effective methods of checking and verifying that information is important. We use national blitz inspections. Those are inspections where a specific sector is targeted, and inspectors nationwide will then go out and do focused inspections on a specific topic, for instance, GHS. And then communication with industry on our findings and assisting and, just make sure that we have open communication lines. We do that through industry associations. And these are just 3 of them in South Africa that are pretty big and that have been a proven track record in assisting the department with aspects when it comes to chemicals management and specifically GHS implementation. So as a parting shot from my side, we know that the GHS aims to harmonize, but we are improving daily when it comes to globalization of the GHS, but we are really not doing so well with harmonization. South Africa is currently implementing or moving into full implementation of Revision 11 of the GHS, but we can see various other countries are at different revisions. So the harmonization isn't really there. And I think that remains a challenge, especially to industry, who are mostly affected by that. So in conclusion, the selection of the continuous building of capacity and raising awareness, I think there's still a long way that South Africa can go to raise awareness within the general public, to make them aware, and even to put some power in their hands to be insistent on the products that they use for them to be provided with the GHS information, because, or hazard communication information, because that is of value to them. That is what they can use to protect themselves. Participation internationally, you saw from the map that Oliver has shared that there is not much participation or implementation throughout Africa. So for us, it is important that international participation by Africa at these forums actually increases and improves in future. Collaboration with social partners, that is locally with our trade unions, with our organized business, our employer representatives, to ensure that we have them on board and supporting us as government in these endeavors, and also internationally. And just my message always to other countries who are in the process of implementing or is considering implementation of GHS, it really does look overwhelming initially, and it really feels like it's too much to handle, and a lot of decisions and a lot of consultation is needed. But just keeping in mind that it has been done, to great success in various other countries, and you can always go back and improve on the system once it is implemented. But just getting it out there is the biggest step. I think that is it from my side, Jack. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Elise, for that fantastic case study. And thank you to all speakers for their excellent presentations. We will now move on to a section of questions and answers. I would encourage everybody participating to submit their questions either through the chat or the Q&A function. And I appreciate that we had one question that was answered by Oliver Wotton in the chat, but I wonder if it might be worth highlighting the question that was said, and Oliver, if you can respond verbally, just in case people haven't had a chance to look at it yet. So Natalie asked, are attempts being made to include endocrine disruption and persistency as hazarded classes in GHS? What is the current status of the discussions? So Oliver, if you can also respond to that verbally for those who haven't seen your response in the box there, that would be very appreciated.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I was lucky enough to take advantage of one of the experts from the subcommittee of experts on the GHS to get an update. And so in terms of those issues, endocrine disruption and persistency, there is potential hazard issues informal working group. They're continuing to work on both these topics, but they are at different stages. And the short answer given is that both EDCs and persistence/mobility are being examined as possible areas for future development under the GHS. I think there's a bit more information that I might be able to provide as well. I think something was missed in the text, and I'll paste it in there as well. But that's the update we have been able to provide. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Okay, we also have Nina who's raised her hand. So if I can just come to you. Would you like to say something, Nina? We're having trouble hearing you currently. Okay. We just asked to unmute there. If you'd like to come in, just let us know. Okay, no worries. We can move on to another question that came in directly through the chat. This asks, how can countries strengthen the implementation of Article 13 requirements for labels and safety data sheets? So, Javier, would you be best placed to respond to this one?
Thank you so much, Jack. Yes, the Rotterdam Convention has a program of technical assistance where parties can request with a letter. I think Mario can give more details about it. Thank you.
Can you please repeat the question? I didn't hear it correctly.
So the question was, how can countries strengthen the implementation of Article 13 requirements for labels and safety data sheets?
Yes, thank you. I think this is something that my colleague Javier covered quite well during his presentation. And this is where we encourage parties to make use of systems like the GHS, so to make sure that they use the proper labeling and hazard classification information. This is something that we have been trying to also encourage through our different training and capacity building activities when we work directly with national authorities at the country level, to also promote the use of systems such as GHS so that they can better and effectively implement Article 13. Thanks.
Thank you, Mario, for that overview there. We have another question that came in directly through the chat, and it asks, how are chemical mixtures classified under the GHS? Javier, I could come back to you unless somebody else wants to take that. Lisa, maybe?
I can try.
Okay.
If you would like me to. Yeah, the classification of mixtures is done either by, if you have data on the mixture itself, you can use that data and the criteria in the GHS Purple Book, and you can classify the mixture in that way. If you don't have mixture data, you can use the ingredient data, the different substances in the mixture. You can use the classification and the data for the substances to classify the mixture. And then there are some other less used methods, like read across methods is also described in the GHS. They are. And it's where you look at similar mixtures, and you can classify from the similarity with another mixture. Yeah. Oliver, would you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you. I won't try to get into the technical side of it, but under one of our recent projects, we did develop a training presentation that is available for people to use on the classification of mixtures. It is quite extensive, but it is quite a technical topic. So I will liaise with Javier and Jack to maybe share a link to that to all participants as well. I think that's useful for people who wish to dive deeper. Thanks.
Javier, you had your hand raised?
Yes, thank you so much, Jack. So, as Lisa mentioned, and there are some methods to classify the mixtures. For instance, for acute toxicity, no? We have acute toxicity estimate values that they are divided in ranges, and those ranges we know the value, we can classify like category 1, 2, 3, or 4, and also depends of the exposure route. So if we have all the data as a whole, we can classify easily. But if it's missing sufficient data, we can apply bridging. But if we have some data, we can apply some formula that depends of the concentration of each ingredient, and also for instance, for acute toxicity, the lethal dose 50. So we can get a value and see in a table which range we can classify that, and then get the category and then get the picture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Javier, for clarifying that for us. We have another question that's coming through the question answer box from Cecilia, which asks, the format of a safety data sheet for a substance is different to a safety data sheet for a mixture. Javier, would you be able to respond to that one, or anyone else on the panel would like to have a go? Otherwise, we can come back to it.
I can answer if
Okay.
no one else would like to. What's the difference between a substance safety data sheet and a mixture? Was that the question?
Yes.
Okay. It's the format of the safety data sheet is given in GHS, and it's the same format for substances and mixtures, but of course there are some differences in certain sections where you should give information about the substance or the mixture. For example, in section 3 in a safety data sheet, you should give, if it's a mixture, you should give the substance ingredients in section 3. And if it's STS for a substance, you should give the information in section 2. 1 and 2. So it's a bit different, but it's the same format for both substances and mixtures. Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa, for that succinct response. We have another question that's come in directly on the chats. It asks, for countries that have used earlier versions of the Purple Book to develop their legislation, do they need to update their legislation or undertake additional training when new elements or revisions are introduced? Mario, would you be best placed to respond to this one? Or anyone else on the panel?
Actually, that's a question that I sent, and I was wondering if either Oliver or Lisa, who covered part of the training components and the earlier versions of the Purple Book, are in a position to answer it.
Yeah, perhaps I'll jump in. So in terms of editions, yes, there and as Elise noted, many different countries apply different versions. So what we suggest is that when bringing in legislation, you would name a version that you're adopting. This might be for different reasons, trading partners, regional partners, to link with those. And then establish some form of update mechanism. So you might update every 2 years, not trying to match exactly the date that a new revision comes out. Of course, give yourself time to implement a new edition, but maybe in your own schedule, then update, say, every 2 years, or establish a mechanism where you would just update, say, 4, 5, 6 years, so that you might jump, for example, from revision 7 to revision 11, and then maybe others. Where there is no specific preference of a revision, we are suggesting the latest version, so that you're as up to date as possible. There is always a need to refresh training, I think, awareness. So I think we would encourage that on an ongoing basis. The revisions to the GHS text do not always imply huge updates that mean information and knowledge is obsolete. So you shouldn't sort of overestimate the changes that come through, but we do encourage updating training and updating knowledge where possible. So those are some thoughts on revisions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. And I think Elise wants to come in here if
Yes,
you
thank you
want
so
to
much.
help.
Thank you so much, Jack. Just to add on to Oliver there. So the subcommittee of specialists, they actually then approves a revision of the GHS in the December meeting. So obviously in that December, the latest revision is not available immediately. It takes another 6 months for that revision to be available to the public in general. So just to keep that in mind when you are referring or when you set up your schedule, as Oliver indicated, for moving on to a next revision. And then also from our experience, advocacy and awareness raising is continuous. It never stops. It has to continue. Get even the training of officials. There's a rotation of officials. They get replaced, they retire, new ones get appointment, they move on to other departments. So there is always a continuous need for training and raising awareness. So yeah, just to add on to what was already said. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. And we have another question that came in. This one says that not all countries have implemented GHS. Important hazards like endocrine disruption and persistency and mobility are missing. The process is very slow to include them. Therefore, GHS should not be the only system that implementation of information requirements relies on. What other systems might you have in mind? Also, if chemicals in products articles enter the border of countries, would anyone like to have a go at responding to that, potentially Oliver or Lisa?
Yep, I'll say a few words. I mean, it's certainly not an answer, but thanks, Alexandra, for the question. I mean, I know that the EU CLP is looking further into that and is implementing those. It's not an area that I'm familiar with, and that other countries have requested training on, knowledge on how they could start bringing that in the absence of the GHS system agreeing it. So that would be interesting to hear if there are countries that are ready to do that. And that's where we would then look to liaise and coordinate with EU colleagues on experience. And Chemi might be at the forefront of that. Sorry. And then in terms of chemicals in products and articles, indeed, this is where under the global framework on chemicals, we are trying to work on transparency and traceability, digital product passports. This is work that we're undertaking. It is, it's methodical work. We need to work through various steps. So, of course, we're not going to have the answer straight away, but we are trying to bridge that gap to chemicals in products as well, beyond just substances and mixtures. So, thanks.
Thank you, Oliver. Would any other panelists like to come in on that question, or should we move to the next? No one? Okay. So we have another question from Bronislava, who asks, the Rotterdam Convention on Pesticides should be linked to the FAO Code of Conduct on Pesticide Management. Under the Code of Conduct, all exported chemicals should be appropriately classified and labelled, preferably according to the GHS. As for the Rotterdam Convention, classification and labelling according to the GHS is only mandatory for chemicals that are subject to Annex 3. Would it not be appropriate to consider extending this obligation to pesticides that are not subject to Annex 2 of the Rotterdam Convention. Might have meant 3 there. Javier, you have your hand up. Would you like to take the floor?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bronislava, for that question. And in Article 13, in paragraph 2, we have the response to this question. So I will gonna read. So without prejudice to any requirement of the importing party, each party shall require that both chemicals listed in Annex 3 and chemicals banned or severely restricted in its territory are, when exported, subject to labeling requirements that ensure adequate availability of information with regard to risks and hazards to human health or the environment, taking into account relevant international standards. So in this paragraph, we can see that chemicals in Annex 3 are required to have labeling, taking into account relevant international standards, but also chemicals that have been banned or severely restricted territory. So it applies for those 2 groups. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Javier, for that succinct explanation. I saw that, Oliver, you had your hand raised. Yes, I'll give you the floor.
Yep, thank you. And indeed, this is where the GHS and the Rotterdam Convention can work hand in hand, because if you're implementing the GHS, then you are, and certainly if you're doing it in the agrochemicals sector, then you are going to be requiring labeling and safety data sheets for all chemicals that are hazardous. So notwithstanding progression, advancements under the Rotterdam Convention, by implementing the GHS, you would already be requiring these things for all chemicals that satisfy the hazard criteria. So I see that as one of the reasons why we're here today, and why we want to emphasize this overlap between the GHS and the Rotterdam Convention. Thanks.
Thank you, Oliver, and thank you to all our panelists for answering the questions, and thank you to all participants for those very engaging questions. That marks the end of the question and answer section of today's webinar. As we approach the end, I would like to sincerely thank all our speakers for their valuable contributions, and thank participants as well for your engagement and your questions as well. Just finally, I would like to invite Mario Giarto from the Rotterdam Convention Secretariat to deliver the closing remarks. Mario, I pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Jack. And I also want to thank very much Oliver, Lisa, Javier, and Elise for their excellent presentations. I think with your experience and knowledge, you have highlighted the important role that GHS plays in supporting the objectives of the Rotterdam Convention, particularly when it comes to hazard communication and information exchange. I think we heard very clearly that for both agricultural and industrial perspectives, the benefits of applying GHS are very clear. Farmers, industrial workers, and other users are better able to understand chemical hazards through standardized labels. And authorities can rely on harmonized classification systems to regulate imports and ensure more consistent risk management approaches. And I think this directly supports the implementation of Articles 12 and 13, like we heard, which depend on having accurate, consistent, and accessible information for decision making. I also appreciate very much the experience shared by Elise in South Africa. I think that shows that implementing the GHS is challenging, but very much achievable. But like she underscored, it requires collaboration, capacity building, awareness raising, and sustained commitment by all stakeholders involved. And again, like others have said before me, I encourage you all to continue strengthening the use of the GHS at the national level. Please approach the Secretariat of the Convention as well as UNITAR when it comes to helping you and guide you to use this system to effectively implement the Convention. Thank you all again for a very productive session and for your very interesting and informative questions. I wish you all a good day and a good afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you, Mario, for those closing remarks. We will be sharing all presentation materials after this webinar. I posted a survey in the chat, so please do take the time to fill that out. That really helps us improve future webinars, and we'll also be sharing the link in the follow-up with all the materials from today. That leaves me with nothing more to say, but thank you for your time and your engagements. We look forward to continuing this important work together, and that includes our webinar. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.